Hey there, it's Carly with the Expat Focus podcast. Did you know we film a lot of our interviews now? So if you're not already watching this one, head over to YouTube, search Expat Focus, and don't forget to subscribe. Is it okay to travel for pleasure during the global pandemic? How do you weigh up the risk versus reward? And as the world currently deals with the Omicron wave of COVID, what measures can you take to make sure your travel is as safe and as responsible as possible? American Crissy Whalin is my guest to chat through these questions. In 2018, she started traveling the world full time with her then 10-year-old son Zephyr, and together they visited 40 countries and more than 100 cities, documenting their adventures on the Instagram account Single Mum Budget Travel. COVID grounded them for a bit, but they recently took another trip, and Crissy is going to share her perspective on travelling during a global pandemic while looking after yourself and the locals. Crissy, just before I hit record, we were talking about how you must be an expert when it comes to PCR and antigen tests by now. How many do you think you've had in the last year?
Well, it's so funny because it's hard to get a hold of them, and you're not necessarily taking them when there's a lull, right? Like when there's not a surge in the variant or any variant, you're not taking. I mean, I'm not regularly taking them at home. We're just sort of hanging out. So I think we've done PCR and antigen. I'm gonna say between the two of us, probably like 5 to 6 times. But it's been interesting because there's the lack of availability, and then there's like, what's the right thing? If I think I've been exposed, do I go stand in line with like a ton of people who also probably think they've been exposed for like hours at a time? Because that seems counterintuitive to just like, so yeah, we've taken a lot of tests, and you know it's almost hard to bring it up without it becoming political, or finding criticism in your own country's way of dealing with it. And in a way, it's kind of sad but nice to know that on Instagram I'm connecting with all these people around the world who are like, "Ah, our country's a total show too." And because it's felt like for a while America's taken the show like crown, particularly in our initial response to a pandemic. And I'm someone who, most people don't know this about me, but I've been writing for two national radio shows in the US that focus on health. So I've been booking and producing interviews with doctors for the better part of a decade. And all my day is reading health info and making sure I don't book a quack doctor that's going to tell people to, ingest horse tranquilizers and whatever. So this whole thing compounding onto itself of somebody who also is now like sort of jumped into the travel sphere. It's like everything has come together for me in this one hot mess.
But the best background. And I'm guessing when people try to school you on your Instagram, you're really active on Instagram, single
Yeah.
mom budget travel. I'm sure you're like, guys, I know this.
It's true. I do sometimes feel like that, but I have to say my mindset is anybody who has bothered to speak to me on Instagram that doesn't know me, that isn't like a personal friend or a friend through a friend, that takes their time to say something or try to offer me knowledge, I'm very grateful for it. Yeah, sometimes I'm like, "Durr," like obviously, like I've been out here doing this, guys. But I, I think people, what Instagram and social media has shown us that people in radio have always known is that people want to connect, right? Even if they wanted to request a song back in the day or call you on your radio show and tell you were stupid, they're looking for connection. And I think social media is like just that amplified times a billion. So when people take the time to say like, "Hey, I read this article," or "I did you know this," even if I already know it, I'm kind of like, "Thank you, thanks so much, I appreciate it,"
Yeah.
because
And really, most people are just looking for that validation, right?
correct, they want to be validated in what they've said to you, and they want to make a connection with you. So it's like,
I noticed your Instagram post the other day where you were talking about being selfish in traveling recently, but
yep.
the difference between being selfish and being, I guess, in the face of other people. You used an ice cream analogy about, eating the ice cream or shoving your, germy ice cream at other people.
Right.
I guess the context of this conversation is that pre-pandemic, you and your son Zephyr were traveling full time around the world, which is amazing. Such a cool thing
Thank you.
and on so many people's bucket lists. COVID grounded you both back in the
Yes.
USA.
Yep.
Recently, you took another trip and probably the first trip outside of the country since
Yes.
the pandemic.
Yes.
So I want to talk about your thought process. I'm guessing all this time that you've been back in the States, you've been dreaming of getting back on the road.
Yes.
What led you to decide that this is the moment, despite Omicron hitting so many countries right now, this was the time for yourself and Zephyr to take off again and do another trip?
Well, the truth of the matter is, I had flight credits that were expiring that were going to mean that I lost about $2,000. And that was really hard for me to swallow. And the crappiest part about it has been I've been trying to be so respectful and so chill for such a long time, despite, my own mental health issues of staying home and being alone and navigating a pandemic as a single parent, and protecting the people I love and care about. Like in the middle of this, we found out my dad has like stage 4 kidney disease. And so he needs to be extra protected, like, holy crap. And so I had purchased these tickets when it seemed like summer of 2021 was like the great reopening for travel, particularly in Europe, and
Mhm.
particularly if you were vaccinated, right? So I got vaccinated early on. My first shot was in January. I waited for hours in a car with my sister to get a vaccine leftover. So I'd gone to a clinic literally in Bayou Jean Lafitte, which is like a tiny little bayou that looks like Pirates of the Caribbean outside of New Orleans. And we waited in line for, almost 6 hours in the car to see if they had leftover vaccines, and they happened to have it. So once you got the leftovers of one shot, they were obligated to give you the second. So I got vaccinated in late January, and then I got fully vaccinated in February, and like by late February. So I was like, cool. And then as soon as Zephyr could get vaccinated, I got him vaccinated because I wasn't going to travel without both of us being vaccinated. Being world travelers, vaccination is 100% a part of traveling. Like, you cannot go to certain countries without vaccines or taking precautions for malaria or taking malaria tablets, whatever it is. So like for me, it's like, yeah, it's a given. You shouldn't step into anybody else's country without a vaccination. Um, Full stop. So I wanted to make sure I vaccinated. And then it was like 2021 is going to be the great reopening.
Yeah.
Cool. We want to support that. We want to support tourism. We want to support people who've been struggling financially and economically. So I bought these tickets that had a little bit of flexibility with them, and I paid extra for the flexibility, but really you can only change it 2 times for the most part if you're buying cheap tickets.
Right.
And then it became a point of like, if you want to change this again, it's going to cost you like basically 3 times as much as the tickets had cost me. And then I lost one ticket that I had credit for. So that was like $1,000 that I just had to like just say, okay, whatever, this is the way it is now. But it's just like, it is what it is. I can't travel. It's not safe. Um, so we planned to go in late summer, and then the Delta variant hit, and we were like, crap. Okay, we're not going in late summer. This like it's not responsible, whatever. So I had planned to push it towards like basically December, because I knew like I had to use these flights before the year had ended or they would just go away. And I thought, well, it would really suck if I couldn't use these flights or whatever. So I'm planning this. I planned for a Thanksgiving with my sister and my mom and my dad, which we all hadn't seen each other for 2 years. And then from there, I was going to fly to Europe because we were already just sort of on the East Coast of the US. And literally, as I'm at freaking Thanksgiving dinner, I'm watching this news of like the Omicron variant hitting Europe. And I'm like, what the actual F? Like at this point, I'm boosted. So I was one of the first people to get boosted as well. So I'm like, ah, like I'm boosted. I don't know what else to do. Like I could turn around, but then I'd also rented my house out on Airbnb to people for like a long-term holiday rent. And I was like,
Go back.
um, So honestly, with a lot of trepidation, I ended up getting on the plane and just thinking like, worst case scenario, I'm financially sound enough in this moment to quarantine if I am told that I have to get on this thing and I have to quarantine in Europe. I also know, which, you're in France. France has been very strict and very like sort of despite protests or whatever, like pretty much everyone's like on the same team, even if they don't like it, the majority of people, right? So I thought, well, far out. My tickets are to France. Of all the places in the world that we might be safe and they might do something or they might consider what the best thing for us to do would be to land in France. And if they turned us around, they turned us around. Or if they told us we had to quarantine, well, I had the Airbnb set up. So, okay. And, just as an American, when you land in a country, I mean, I'm living in the South, right? So, like, inside my tiny bubble of New Orleans, it's predominantly like pretty cool. Uh, Politically, it's very split, but at the same time, everyone is relying on tourism to come back to New Orleans because the entire city relies on tourism. So it's kind of like, even if you don't want to vaccinate or you don't like the idea of a mask, most people were kind of like, yeah, but we need the tourists back. So, like, and we want carnival, we want Mardi Gras season. So, like, whatever we can do to get Mardi Gras back, we'll do it. We'll suck it up. So, a little bit more like France in that regard, which New Orleans always is more like France, right? So, I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. Worst case scenario, get sent back, whatever. If I got sent back, I could claim the tickets with my travel insurance and get reimbursed versus just losing the tickets, which was also a consideration I had. And then I got there and I was like, wow, France has this on lock, part of my French. I was just like, we had to apply prior to leaving. We had to apply like a month in advance and make sure we got our digital COVID pass from France. Um, it just seemed like everywhere we went in France was way less of the absolute chaos that is the United States. So, not that I'm justifying it at all, because you do have to acknowledge, like, you are potentially exposing. This is how COVID keeps traveling, right? People are just keep traveling. And so I got myself into a pinch because I couldn't go backwards. I couldn't stay at my family's like for a longer period of time necessarily. And I was going to lose these tickets. But if I'd gotten on the flight and we cleared customs and got turned around, my travel insurance that I had paid extra for would have reimbursed me for it. So it's kind of like, all right, let me just do this for the sake of getting reimbursed. Cause there was like, it just like my gut hurt thinking about losing my, it was like over $2,000 worth of travel plans, $3,000 worth of travel plans I'd made.
It's a big loss. It's a big financial loss.
And it's a big financial loss for somebody who is like, doesn't live on a larger income. So for me, at the saved, I worked so hard to save this money. And so, I still felt guilty about it. I still took off going like, I can't believe I've booked a flight and they've just announced that Omicron is like this, huge surge. And I'm going towards a continent that is ahead of my country on the surge, but I know it's a matter of days before it's wildfire across the US. So nowhere is technically safe, but that's still not an excuse or reason to be disrespectful or, whatever. So I, again, that's why I just like, you have to own it. Like, what I did was absolutely selfish for me. Like, I needed to go there so that I could get my refund. If I got my holiday out of it, okay, but I didn't even know how my holiday was going to be. So, you, right now, traveling for pleasure, as I said on my Instagram, is a selfish act. It is. Seeing your family for pleasure, it might be a mental health requirement for you. Like, you might be completely fried, but you are still taking a selfish risk. And everyone will justify it and will go, well, I'm vaccinated. I'm vaccinated. I wear masks. I got the digital COVID pass. I'm participating in the rules. You've got to just take on board that traveling is a selfish act for pleasure. Like, if you're forced to travel for work or you're forced to travel for whatever whatever you're escaping, fleeing something, sure. But travel for pleasure in this moment is still, we're still in a pandemic. It's still a selfish act, and you need to acknowledge that and not be flippant about it, right? Like, if
But
you're going to
you
do
did
it.
take the selfish act and you got through when you landed in France.
Yes, we did get through. And then we went to Denmark as well, and we went to Finland, and everywhere we went in the EU, I remember being in the Arctic Circle in Rovaniemi, and we're at a little tiny restaurant, and there was like two people in the restaurant, and I had our digital COVID pass and our vaccine cards with us, but I didn't have Zephyr's passport. And this lady said to me, "You need to go back to your thing and get his passport because I need to match it." Which I was like, "Yeah, you know what? Fair play." Like she said, next time.
Inconvenient, but
Right. I was willing and had the conversations with Zephyr about like how this travel would be in this time. We will be inconvenienced. We will be turned away. We might not make it. Like all of the expectations for us were set. So I tried to be very prepared. I tried to be like really considerate of the people who are trying to work, like the person in the store, the person at customs, the person that's your waitress, the person at the grocery store, the person on, in the metro trying to sell you your ticket and explain to you how to do this. It's the mentality of like, if you're a guest, and how do you behave as a guest in someone's home? And so that's kind of how it was. Like, if they ask me to leave, they ask me to leave. If they ask me to wear a mask, I'm wearing a mask. If they ask me to prove my ID with the thing, even though I have the digital thing, cool. They're doing the right thing. They're trying to make it right. I'm a guest, so that's how you behave. And I've been saying that prior to the pandemic. When you go to another country, you go to another city, you step out of your house, you're a guest somewhere, right? You are, that is my the one thing I wish people would learn in travel is that you're a guest. It doesn't matter you paid to be there. That doesn't give you the right to treat people like, it certainly doesn't give you a right to spread disease and behave disrespectfully in a country that is not yours. Like, I don't go into my friend's house and take a dump on their carpet. I use their bathroom and I wash my hands. And people are behaving as if it's okay to just go spread their germs and take a dump on everyone's carpet.
two questions. One, how did you and Zephyr go about striking that balance between being tourists,
Yep.
traveling, seeing things, because that was the whole point of traveling. That is the whole point of traveling,
Right.
and being respectful. And what did you notice of other travelers that you would say is the wrong way to go about it right now?
So we made a pact that like we would just suck it up and walk a lot. And I got I downloaded some of the metro apps in various countries, and also Google Maps gives you an idea of if you're forced or you need to take public transit. It tells you when it's busy, particularly in Paris. It's wonderful because you can put into Google, "Hey, I'm going to go from here to here," and it's a long distance. But is it really busy right now? Is it peaking time? Is it peak commuter time for the locals? So I was just trying to be cognizant of staying out of people's way when I didn't need to be there. If we didn't need to take a metro in the middle of commuter time because that's what we wanted to do,
And that's
I
a
was like,
COVID crowd risk.
correct. It's
Yeah.
a COVID risk for us, but it's also a COVID risk for them. So I thought, well, what we're going to commit to is walking a lot and walking outside and getting from like we would go on our Google Maps. And if it was 30 minutes of walking versus 20 minutes to take two metros, well, we were like, what's 10 minutes going to do? It's not going to kill us. Um, and so, I mean, and in a way, it kind of counteracted all the croissants and cinnamon rolls that we ate because we were walking like 8, 9 miles a day. So we didn't, and then just being conscious of where were crowds. Like, I never had any interest in being in a place that was super crowded. And so, even at places like the Louvre, you could see when you were buying tickets, or you could see on Google, and I don't know how they do this technology, but it's kind of unreal and whatever. It's probably because they're tracking all of us, the amount of crowds that were there. So, like, even though when we finally got to the Louvre, it was more crowded than I thought, they did turn people away in line who did not have their COVID pass and who did not have weren't willing to wear a mask. I mean, yes, I saw people behaving badly all over the place. There's, a million wannabe influencer photo shoots of girls in ridiculous clothing, no mask, posing everywhere, that I was just
Actually, one
like,
of the things I love most about your regular Instagram stories camera on the influencers and give us a nice little commentary on what you're seeing and how ridiculous they look.
it really is. And I don't mean to be nasty to anybody, but I just feel like prior to even COVID, and you don't need a photo shoot in front of a Picasso because you're not as interesting
That's
as that Picasso. I mean, he might pull or whatever, like he might be a womanizer, but like just art versus like, and I always have said this, like, yeah, art versus you, like you're your own masterpiece, but like if you're going to a place to see other things, you know, how much of a photo shoot do you really need of you there? Like I'm all for a happy snap of like, hey, I paid $500 to get to the top of Machu Picchu. I'm getting a picture. Fine. Versus the photo shoots of people who are putting themselves in peril. They're taking up everybody else's time. And you're like, what is the purpose of that?
Love the influencers with a bag of alternative outfits.
Yes. Oh, I've seen it all. And I think I was really shocked to see that in COVID in the middle of the Omicron variant, and I did see quite a lot of that. It was like, yeah, could you like, I mean, this feels like you don't need to have an entire photo shoot right here, particularly with no mask and
I mean,
particularly like,
actually, on one hand, I get it because there are less crowds for the influencers to have these landmarks all to themselves to play with. But yeah, it's a bit extreme.
it is extreme. And, I've always said like they're always doing the dumbest thing. They're like leaning across something or like sitting on a cliff somewhere. And I'm like, okay, like, no offense, but like, I don't want to see you die. That will mess me up. Like, get the hell away from the cliff some more, you dumb. Like, so I saw a certain degree of that. I saw people who didn't want to wear masks in stores, didn't respect restaurants, who were trying to like follow protocol and, like to argue with them about it. I saw people trying to get away with eating on public transit as a way to not wear a mask, which I was like, nice try, psych. We already know that. We know what you're doing. And I think to me, getting my head around the fact that women are assholes has been like the biggest pandemic for me, that like women who I'm like, I mean, we're all assholes. Like it doesn't matter. I feel like I've always put women as a higher moral standard. And what I've noticed in the pandemic and being an American the last 4 years, women are total a-holes too. And so it's just like, seeing some of that, you're just like, okay. That's been the most shocking part, I think.
And you did stay with hosts when you were in Europe most recently over
Mm.
winter. How did you find the hosts were with having guests during the Omicron wave?
Anyone who is, I mean, the people's Airbnb that I rented in Paris, they had just in 2020 purchased that apartment. They live in the building. They purchased a secondary studio for Airbnb because it is a way to make money in France. I mean, Paris is one of the most expensive cities in the world to live in. So, there's always going to be controversy whether, Airbnb is okay to do or not, whatever. I'm very grateful for it. I do it. Like I do like the idea that you have to live in the same place or live in the same building now. I think those rules are good. Because I live in a city that was like totally predatorily, like, I don't even know if that's a word, but like taken by people who didn't live there, just buying up stuff and pushing out the locals. So I'm very respectful of that. I live in my house. I Airbnb the front of my house. That's how we should be moving forward. And also, I do think like with those rules, it allows local hotels and locally owned hotels to have a chance, which I always support locally owned hotels as well. I don't just stay in Airbnbs, but for our hosts, they had said like they bought this thing, they lived next door. They were hoping to manage it and make some extra money off of it. He was a teacher, so like his whole life had changed as well, being a teacher during COVID. And, you know, they were grateful that we were staying there. He kept trying to apologize that he didn't have two beds for us. And I was like, as long as no one tells my son's friend he had to share the big bed with me and we put pillows in between us, or whatever. It's like, when I went to Finland, I stayed in an Airbnb and then we stayed with the host in her Airbnb, and both people in Finland were really grateful for it. Um, it's hard. I have so much compassion for people who have suffered through this financially. I can't say that I have suffered financially because I wasn't making that much money necessarily prior to the pandemic, which is why it's single mom budget travel. And I've kept my job and I'm very grateful for that. And so I've been living off of a really small income and living a life that feels very close to a financial edge, even though I do get child support. And so I don't want to paint a picture that I'm impoverished, but in comparison to like what a lot of people went through where like literally their livelihoods were just taken away, I'm very empathetic towards that. And so that's been the balance of like, how do I support travel and tourism and the people that I love who make it possible? And how do I be respectful of a pandemic? And it's a threading a really gnarly needle. It's like just been so hard to do. I mean, I almost didn't want to even post on Instagram through the pandemic because I was like, I don't give a shit about talking about travel right now. I give a shit about how people are doing and what's going on. But at the same time, I'm like, well, but when we get through this, I really want to continue to promote it and I want people's livelihoods who are in the travel industry to like continue. So again, it's been just a very bizarre balance. And I don't know how other travel bloggers and people have handled it, but I have felt so much angst and stress over it just from like a philanthropic, I give about the world point of view.
Have you found it harder to travel on a budget during COVID?
That's interesting. I think yes and no. I think uh traveling right now recently rates are obviously lower, so there's that, and I don't want to promote that. That's not something where I'm like, yeah, get in and like get those cheap rates, even though like in reality, like, yeah, things are a little bit cheaper. So if that's something you do need to take advantage of, okay, I get it. I'm not, no judgment. I just don't want to like throw it out there like free for all. you know there's been a lot of conversation about, particularly in the US, with supply chain and the cost of living is way up, and that includes the cost of food. So I haven't noticed it necessarily traveling. I've noticed it for me personally in my life, things that cost money, interesting things like I was talking with my mom about this last night, pine nuts or like quadruple the price because of the pandemic and the environmental impact of what's going on right now with all these storms and fires and floods and off season storms that's impacting crops. And so like Italian pine nuts or something is like ridiculous. We're like, I just want some pesto. Why is the pine nut bag $50? Those are things that I've been conscious of during the pandemic and just seeing how yeah, the travel industry has been absolutely smashed, but just like the world in general, like there's just a shortage of things. So getting back into travel is another, like I constantly talk about balance. This is just a balance of like, I think the travel companies are going to have to make things affordable for people if they want people to get back out, because if the travel industry was impacted, other people are impacted. People don't have a lot of expendable income. So it's going to be like a meet me halfway. Like how are the airlines going to not tick up the prices to the point that people can't afford that? And how are they going to survive? Right? Because we saw like Norwegian Air right at the beginning of the pandemic stopped flying and stopped their routes to any place outside of the EU. Well, I was using Norwegian Air like it was my best friend. Like it was a great international airline for budget travel that you knew was safe and you knew was good quality. That's gone. That makes me sad. Like the things like that have been impacted, so that when French B like relaunched like and repositioned itself and we're like doing cheap travel from the United States to France, I was like, I'm going to support French B because they're making it easier for me to like get to where I'd like to go, and I want to support high quality budget airlines because I do think that's the way going forward. And I think that's what's going to make travel more accessible to people, which has been my entire point in sharing a single mom budget travel, is how can travel be affordable and within people's reach, and I believe that if we travel more, we're better people. And I'm not talking about restful vacations and self-care vacations. I'm talking about taking yourself or your family out to see the world and learn about it. I think if you teach kids or you teach yourself, you don't have to have kids to do this, but if you travel with the intent to learn about another place, it makes you a better person and makes the world a better place. So how can that be more accessible to a lot of people? So I want the travel industry to survive this. My heart hurts for it, and I want travel to be accessible to people who have previously not had accessibility to it. So, and when will the pandemic end? I have no
Well,
idea.
we kind of thought maybe by 2022, but it's
Yeah.
hasn't turned out that way.
No.
Crissy, you talked about preparing your son for the latest trip that you took during Christmas. I should say you came back to the States after Christmas.
Yep.
Preparing him, set expectations. This might not be the sort of trip we were doing before. What are you hoping what did he take away from that experience? And what lessons are you hoping he may have learnt about, being respectful in the world and traveling with the conscience, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, it's been something we it's been a way that we've behaved since we started traveling. I think I probably take a lot of criticism for the way that I raise Zephyr, regardless of what I do, which is fine. But I want him to be looking out, is what the word I always kind of the phrase I always say is like, I want him to look out, observe, and be curious. And so I, in traveling the past few years, we've been really been working on that. And he doesn't, when I started traveling with him at 10, people just assumed that, I'd fill in the gaps with the iPad on long distance trains and long journeys and stuff. And I didn't do that. He had to have books, he had to have toys to play with. So if he was doing homeschool, um, and it's been really important to me to teach him to look out and to be curious and to ask questions. And so on this last leg, he was kind of already prepared. Like we talked about it, and I have to say, like, part of it is how I'm personally trying to raise him, and part of it is him being a really, really, really awesome kid and being naturally curious, um, and naturally not fussy. He's not a fussy eater. He's interested in a lot of things. He's adventurous, and so that's part him, and that's part how I've been raising him thus far. So, uh, my generation, I'm a Gen X, but I'm at the tail end of Gen X. So I was a latchkey kid kind of growing up, and like my mom was working, my dad was working. And so I was taking care of my sister and getting us home from school and making food and all that kind of stuff. So I have a little bit of a different viewpoint than millennials and zennials who are like asking for justice in their childhood, which is great. I was trying to ask for justice, but also just like rolling with the punches. And so now I think there's a little bit of like there's always an overcorrection, right? We went from like screaming at kids to be good at sports when they were kids to everyone gets a ribbon. It's somewhere always in the middle, right? So again, it's always a balance. So for him, we talked about expectations of things that he wanted to do in Europe, which was, part of the reason we were going. But then I just always say to him, don't get attached to the outcomes, because we always learn from something. Even the crappiest things that have happened to us traveling, we learn from it and we talk about it. And it's always something that like everything is a learning moment for us. So we set a lot of very important ground rules. Like I I don't want to say that I'm a parent that's like bad news first, because I'm definitely not. I'm super like, we can do it. We can do anything. Like, woo, we're gonna freaking go travel the world in our backpacks from here. It's gonna be great. I'm very like glass half full, but with a warning on it. Like I just don't like to be flippant about anything. So, we just knew, hey, they might not even let us get off the plane. They might turn us around halfway through the trip. We might have to leave. And he was like, cool, mom. And, Zephyr, we're going to do a lot of stuff outside. We're going to do a lot of walking around. We're going to do a lot of observing. We're not going to be able to do as much of some of the things that we like to do. And he was like, I just want to be out and traveling. I just want to see things, because he's now like so conditioned to it. we were genuinely missing it. Like me in particular, I felt like I moved to New Orleans at the beginning of the pandemic, so I had to make friends, which was like kind of impossible to a certain degree during the pandemic. He made friends in the neighborhood really quickly, which was lovely. Um, but like a part of who we are was 1,000% missing. So we understand when people say they're having a hard time with the pandemic and there's so much that they miss. I get it. Like I freaking get it. The thing that I believe is a core part of who I am was just non-existent. But also, I give more of a shit about people than I do needs first. I understand. And that's why you try to teach your kids. It's like, cool. I want that, but like what
Right now, there are bigger things going on. Yeah.
right. And also like how do you teach your kids to care later on? You need to teach them from the jump because once they hit 6 or 7, if you've been treating them like they're the first kid ever born in this world, that's freaking hard to teach them compassion later. You know what I mean?
Needs to
And
be.
I did that with Zephyr.
That's really commendable.
Thanks. I mean, it's just really hard to teach your kid like you're the most important person to me, but you're not the most important person in the world.
In the universe. Yeah. So, Crissy, I'd like to know, and obviously everyone's reasons for a travel are a little bit different, but as you said, it comes down to at the moment, if you're able to do it for pleasure and not for an, dire family reason or mental health reason, you are being selfish and accept that. And if you're going to do it anyway, what are your top tips to people to be traveling in a I suppose, socially conscious and
Right.
respectful way at this time?
My top tip is don't go out of your house if you're not willing to behave like a guest. Um, the golden rule is the most important travel tip you need is treat people how you would want to be treated. And then my second thing would be um, obviously, depending if you're doing international travel or if you're just doing sticking within your country, there's going to be various rules. Know the rules of where you're going because even in a place like America, and then I know in Australia it's the same way too. But even in America, it's city to city. So the rules here in Los Angeles are different from the rules in New Orleans, even though this is America. The rules in San Francisco, which is the same state as California, are different than the rules in LA. It is your responsibility as a traveler or a guest somewhere to know the rules. This is pre pandemic, this is post pandemic, this is pandemic traveling. You better know the rules and you better be willing to follow those rules. It is not your right to go anywhere and be disrespectful. So I say, if you're not willing to follow the rules, you should stay home because you can create your own rules within your house and that's cool, but you can't decide what another place's rules are. And if anything that we've seen from this pandemic is that people don't want to follow the rules, right? So if you're not somebody who can follow the rules, you're not ready for travel right now. Sorry to tell you, you're not gonna say it. That's just I'm not changing my opinion on that either. Um, the other thing is like the masking is so important wherever you're going, even if it's like local or you're just going to a different city, you really have to mask. I'm like not even interested in the debate any longer. Um, it's just the way it is. So be
And can I
prepared.
just say hashtag influenced because after you posted the other day about the different higher grade masks that you
Yes.
chose to travel with, I actually jumped on Amazon and bought some.
Oh, good. Yes. I found the KF94 mask is the most comfortable, but offers the similar protection for anyone who didn't see that or doesn't know what I'm talking about. Like the KN95 is obviously the top level of quality for masks in terms of protection, particularly with this variant. We found out that with Omicron, again, it's like with travel and with life, even when shitty things happen, we learn from them. So we've been learning as we've gone across things are happening in this pandemic. The cloth masks aren't cutting it anymore. The medical masks maybe aren't even that great either.
Omicron, yeah.
Right. So for me, I found the KF94 mask is a go-to because it provides the comfort around the ears that maybe the medical and the cloth masks kind of have. Because if you've noticed that, like with the KN95s, they're like the duckbill mask and they're super tight, which they're supposed to be, but it can be really hard on people's ears. And so for me, if it's people are saying to me, I don't wear the mask, they're so uncomfortable. I'm like, well, try this KF94. I feel like it's the best of both worlds. It's got the wire so that you can push it around your nose and stay really tight and compact and safe, but it's got a little bit more comfort around the ears, like the medical masks, the cloth masks offer. It goes all the way down underneath your chin, which is really important. You don't want gaps. Um, Wearing a mask is so important, and you've got to make it work how it can work best for you. Washing your hands, carrying hand sanitizer, like I can't even stress enough how important that is. Like I knew that as a parent, putting my kid in preschool, their fingers are up their noses and in their butts all day long. And they're not like, I mean, I'm serious. Like they had to shut down my son's preschool at one point because the norovirus in like 2012 or something was like ripping through Southern California and preschools, and ours got shut down. And I remember it vividly. And I was like, yeah, I worked at his preschool. I got thrown up on. I had to like wipe poo off the walls. I had to like watch kids have their fingers up their nose all day long. And you're like, so when they started saying like, oh, it's so true. Kids are disgusting. People are disgusting too. Like I've seen so much in the world of like traveling where people are just like picking their nose on public transit. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? But I would say like just hand sanitizer. I'm not even like a super freak about that kind of stuff, but washing your hands and having hand sanitizer available to you is really important. And the other thing with the masks is if you're stuck and you can't get access to more KF95s or KN95s, a way to reuse them is to wipe them down inside. And you should do this regardless. You've got to wipe them down inside with antibacterial wipes, or like spray the crap out of them with your antibacterial spray. And then you can reuse them if you're in a pinch. Because obviously, people have a hard time getting them, or they're waiting for shipments, or like they feel like it's wasteful. You can clean them. You know, I personally believe you should be vaccinated. I don't like to like preach about that to people because it just ends up in some type of like my body, my rights argument. And I get it. Um, as a traveler, if you're traveling internationally, you do kind of have a responsibility to be vaccinated because from what we've seen with the testing in particular, is it's not super accurate. So, and that's another reason why I've been sharing about my son, having COVID and me not having COVID. We're in the same house, or people getting false negatives or false positives or whatever. So, like, if you're planning on, even with the Djokovic situation, the testing is not super accurate. That can't be the only thing. And I think that's what we're going to see coming through in terms of the travel trends for 2022, is just this expectation that you're going to get vaccinated if you want to travel internationally. So be prepared to do that.
One point I wanted to raise that actually I saw because of your ex-husband, and I'm not a stalker, he has a profile himself.
Yes, he does.
Definitely used to be a colleague, so that's how
he is a colleague. Yes.
He posted after visiting you guys in LA, he happened to still be there because he's tested positive for COVID. And he made the really valid point that if you're going to travel, make sure you have the funds, the means to extend your trip if you have to, because he's now in hotel quarantine and looking at needing to spend a couple of extra unexpected weeks in the States.
I said that to somebody who messaged me the other day, and I said that to him. And I said it to him because I was preparing for that. I said, if you're going to travel now, and I said it on my Instagram, be prepared that you will be stuck because you have no control over those rules. And, a lady sent me a message saying, oh, I have this week. Do you think I should go to Paris right now? I'm fully vaxxed and boosted, but I have this 1 week where my husband can watch the kids and I could go visit my friend. And I said, if you only have 1 week, I would not go, because
you need an extra 2 weeks in case you get COVID.
You have to. You have to plan an extra 2 weeks. Tack on an extra 2 weeks for whatever you're planning to do, and know that like you could get stuck. I mean, Byron literally got his test on the way to the airport. He had to turn his butt around and go hotel quarantine immediately.
Man.
like we were willing to do that in France when we knew we had to leave, and it was a 24-hour test turnaround 24 hours before we were supposed to get back to the United States. I didn't know the results of our tests. I was looking at Airbnbs that I could book for 2 weeks in case I got stuck. And I had to have those funds available.
Crissy,
and have traveler's insurance. Damn it. Have traveler's insurance.
Crissy, you did make it back to the States, and in the case of yourself and Zephyr with your most recent trip, everything was fine. You didn't get COVID. What is next? What are you planning? Are you planning to hunker down back in the USA until after the height of Omicron is over? Are you already looking ahead to your next trip?
We are going to see how Omicron plays out for sure. We're going to, because Zephyr is now COVID positive, we have to wait and sort of hunker down in Los Angeles as well. We'll go back to New Orleans. We'll sort of reset where we're at with everything. I want to say that, like, wherever you go, you can step outside your house and get COVID. So that isn't to say like don't travel. It isn't to say go nuts and go traveling. Not saying that, just being cognizant that it is super transmissible. We're going to go back to New Orleans, see how it goes for a month or two. I have plans to take Zephyr back to Europe in spring because he is going to start art history as part of his schooling. And the first part of the course, which is something he actually will get school credits for, is Renaissance art. And so I thought, well, I can't, as a traveler and as a parent who's been homeschooling for the last 2 years, then be like, here, look at the David through your computer screen, see how awesome it is. So our hope is to go back, but we're going to be very cautious and very respectful. And I would just like to say, to maybe tie a bow on it, that the mentality that if you got COVID, it's cool, you can go, which I think was the Djokovic kind of a thing, where it's like, I've had it.
The tennis player in Australia, yeah.
Yeah, he was like, well, it doesn't matter, I don't want to vaccinate because I've had it. And there's a lot of people with that mentality. That is not a loving mentality, and that is not guaranteeing you from not getting it. My sister's daughter, my half sister, has a daughter who works in nursing who has gotten COVID 3 times and gave it to her at Christmas. And they didn't think she would give it to them because she's already had it twice. She gave it to her mom at Christmas time. She flew from Los Angeles to New Orleans to visit her mom, gave her COVID. So having had it is not the okay to then just go nuts. If you've been vaccinated, if you've been boosted and you've had it, you probably are safer than most. But with the way that it keeps continuing to mutate, that is not something that anybody should be promoting. That's not enough. And it's not okay to say that. So we have to like squash that as like, I've had it, I'm fine. That's my like, whole kind of bow on all of it.
Crissy, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the Expat Focus podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Single Mom Budget Travel is where you can find Crissy on Instagram. Make sure you follow her to see what she and Zephyr get up to next.
That's it for this episode. If you have travel advice to share, join the conversation with us on social media. We are Expat Focus. For free moving guides and other useful resources, you can head to expatfocus.com, and I'll catch you next time.